Hello everyone, and welcome to Bob's Garden. Today we're going to talk about some bonsai basics. First of all, let's talk about bonsai itself. Bon means a pot, and sai means tree, and that's all it means, pot and tree, bonsai. A lot of people mispronounce that, and they say bonsai. Well, bonsai means charge and go for it, whereas bonsai means tree and pot. It's all it is. These could make excellent houseplants. The only tricky part is watering, and I'm going to teach you how to do that. But there's no reason that this cannot be grown indoors. It's a tropical plant. It's a ficus, and like all tropical and subtropical plants, it will do very happy in the home. So if you have an apartment and you can't bring this outside, it makes an excellent plant. This ficus makes an excellent plant. We also have some Schefflera bonsai as well. So these usually be very easy to put in your lineup of house plants. And the only thing being is the watering requirements. So let's talk a little bit about how this can be developed. You can buy a bonsai already done. That's very easy to do, and we can train it by the clip and grow method. There's no wiring. It just you cut it in the direction that you want to grow, and it's quite easy that way. So you don't have to bother with learning the wiring. You don't have to bother with maintaining the wiring. And most of all here, especially on ficus, you can end up with some wire damage if you're not careful. If you look closely in here, what happens is as the wire is on there, the trunk of the bark will grow over that wire, and then you get a scar. Here's one bonsai, a night blooming jasmine that's been wired, and you can see the individual wires on that. This is early training, and we'll have to cut those off soon, otherwise it's going to cut into the bark. What happens when you wire is you don't wire right up against the branch or the trunk, and the trunk starts to grow and it grows into the wire. So a clip and grow method is much easier for beginners to get used to it. And then if you want to learn wiring later, you have plenty of online opportunities or workshops you can take to learn how to do that. So just to get as into the hobby itself, it's a good way to do it by this clip and grow method. Now all bonsai have a front and a back. And if you want to know where the front is, you look down the midline of the pot and you split the pot like this, and you can see that the front is, the back is set behind the midline. So this would be the front. When we choose a front, we choose a front that has a concave surface to it with some interesting roots. We have these banyan roots coming down through here, and it's a much more interesting way to look at it. It invites you in to the view here. This is the back side, and you can see this should be quite obvious being the back the way this is growing, but we will alternate looking at the back and the front because it needs to be rotated throughout the year. So sometimes the sun's hitting it from one side, and sometimes the sun's hitting it from the other side. This needs to come into the house when the temperatures drop below 50 degrees. And then it's situated under grow lights. Now, if you have a bright sunny window, that works very well too. East or west exposures. Southern exposure, you're really going to have to keep on top of the watering. So for a beginner, I would recommend an east or west exposure, or put it under artificial lights. Now these do enjoy being outside for the summer. All my bonsai are out for the summer, but they can also be grown inside the house. Now, bonsai pots are characterized by very large drainage holes in proportion to the pot. You can see these holes on the base here, and we have these screens on here that we have to put in, otherwise all the soil comes out. and we have this special bonsai screen material. No, it's not really special. This is needlepoint. You can get this at any craft hobby store. And we just cut this, and we don't put the whole thing on the bottom because that's impeding drainage. So we cut a piece just to cover the holes. We wire it into there, and that gives us a way to keep the soil into the pot. Um, Now, watering, when you water bonsai, you're going to see some things that are online that say to put the water, put your bonsai in a bathtub and fill the bathtub up with water and let it soak up from the bottom. Don't do that. It's wrong. When you do that, what's going to happen is that the bottom is going to be very wet and the top will dry out and you'll think, oh, and it's time for me to water this. And but the bottom is still wet, so it gets overly um, bogged down. It gets too much water, and the water just sits on the top, and then the bottom stays constantly soaked. So when you water bonsai, always water from overhead, wetting the leaves, wetting the soil, and when the water starts to drip out the bottom, you're done watering until your next watering cycle when it's dry. Now, when is it going to be dry? That's a good question. It depends on your house. It depends on where you're keeping it. And the best thing is that you're going to learn how to water it by watching your plant. I know when my plants need the water. It's just getting to know them. And each individual one will require different watering in terms of frequency. The other thing is we do use some small amounts of fertilizer. It gets everything it needs from this. This is about 20 years old. Maybe it's closer to 25 years old. And the leaves of the ficus have gotten smaller in response. When we these pot bound, what will happen is when you water, the water will just sit on top of the soil and not move. It should be very quick draining, and it just stays there and stays there. And then you can also look at the bottom of the pot, and you can see roots growing out. Then you know it's time to repot. And we'll have a video on how to repot a bonsai coming up. So the other thing it's going to need some fertilizer, a small amount of fertilizer. Generally, a 20-20-20 fertilizer, your NPK number, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and that uh, is about a quarter of a teaspoon in a gallon of water. Very light fertilizer. We fertilize nearly every time it's watered with a very small amount of fertilizer. If you go to an exhibition of bonsai in some of the horticultural centers, you'll see these little um, pills on all four corners of the bonsai. And when it gets watered, a little bit of that's fertilizer. When the fertilizer gets a little bit into the soil, and so it has a constant slow feed. Now during the winter time, I do cut back on the fertilization to every 2 weeks, and they do quite well. And my full spectrum bulbs are about 18 inches above the top of the tree. So in terms of keeping it clean, you can cut these. It's very easy to cut, and you style by cutting. So like this one up here is a little bit too high. So we come in here and we can just bring it down and we will get some sap when we do that. So we have to be careful with that. Now, what I do when it's ready to repot is I let it grow out because you cannot do root pruning without also cutting foliage. Very important. So if you're going to prune roots, you must prune foliage as well. And then when we do that, we put it back into the same pot. That's the whole idea. If you take this out and put it into a bigger pot, what's going to happen? It's going to get bigger. And then it's going to revert back to a houseplant ficus rather than a bonsai ficus. So it's very important that, there's nothing wrong with changing the pot. If you wanted a different color, say you want a gray color, say you want to put this in a round pot, but it should be about the same size of the one that it's already currently growing in. So that's perfectly okay. It's all up to your personal taste. Um, And aside from that, they can make excellent plants for the household. And it's learning when to water. That's the key. Now, the thing about bonsai soil is that there's not a reserve of moisture in it. That's what the key issue is. And when you water, there's no water retention in this. Now, what I do is, especially with ficus and the tropical and subtropical bonsai, is I add to my bonsai mix, I add a potting mix as well. The potting mix does not have any fertilizer in it. It's just a good container potting mix. And I'll put up to 30% of that in there so that the bonsai will hold more moisture, and I can err on the side of not having to water so much. And the other thing to be aware of is that when these do come inside, if you have them outside all for the entire summer, you should bring them in during the night and then bring them out again during the day until the temperatures get too low where they have to stay in. So you transition them from outside to inside. And reverse is true in the spring. When it's time to bring these out, you'll want to put them in very deep shade and gradually bring them into full or as much sun as you can give them, because um, the leaves will burn if you do that. So expect some leaf drop during the winter. That's normal. You're not killing it. And during the early year, you want to be careful bringing these out. Don't wait until the hottest day of the year with full sun and just put them right out, because you're going to scorch the leaves. And aside from that, um, we like to moss these up because they'll require less uh, watering with this moss on it. It helps to hold the soil together, and there's also aesthetic effect. I've already removed some moss from here, and you can see how much drier this is in here because I'm getting ready to repot. Now, during the winter time, your moss will die. It's not a big thing. I normally just take the moss off most of the plant when I bring them indoors, and I'll just leave a little around the edges here so it doesn't dry out so much during the winter time. And this is catching my eye and it's bugging me, so I'm going to cut that off right now. Um, so this is a good way to get into this, and there's a lot of books, a lot of information online on them, and you can do very well with this. We also have Cheflera, which I'll be potting up later. Here's another ficus here. This one here is a little bit skinnier. It's got a little leggy over the winter, and I'm beginning to cut it back. And we also have a Cheflera bonsai here, and these also make very good um, house plants as well. It's just a regular Cheflera, and you can see these air roots starting to develop, and I'm going to develop these. So this, at one time, this here would look like this. So we let it get thicker. I'm going to let this come down, and we'll train it into the pot, and it makes for very, very interesting bonsai. And this, it looks very nice. Now, if you're having a party or something, and you want to have your bonsai on the table, that's okay. You can bring that onto as a centerpiece, but that's not. It shouldn't be where it lives. It needs light, it needs fertilizer, it needs water, so you should keep this where you would normally keep your house plants. But there's no reason why you can't, if you're having a dinner party, bring one of your bonsai out and display it. And again, we have a front and a back to this. The front is characterized by strong roots, a concave trunk, and it leans slightly towards the person who created it, which is me. So it's a good way to get into bonsai. It's a good way to have an interesting house plant. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bob's Garden. Remember to share, subscribe, and comment on my videos. And please be curious, not judgmental.